Westeros is quite a scary place to live. Setting aside the constant warring and years-long winters, you also had to contend with the likes of the White Walkers, other unknown Lovecraftian horrors, dragons, and don't forget the existence of magic and sorcery. Almost everything magical in the wider world and lore of Westeros is often linked to some kind of nightmare feel. For example, Mirima's door singing and her shadow dancing, the undying just chilling as half-rotten corpses around a giant floating blue heart in the House of the Undying, Melisandre seemingly living for hundreds of years and her ability to create shadow babies, Bloodraven's cave connecting to chasms that pockmark the seemingly entire planet and are so large people haven't even explored a fraction of them in thousands of years. The old gods are also very creepy when you consider the human sacrifice elements to the religion and whatever Bloodraven has become. There are countless abandoned places such as Hardhome, the cursed ruins of Valyria, which we know contains some kind of creature large enough to harm Balerion the Blackdread, the random oily black stones and the old ones, the lost city of Yin and the mysteries of Sotholios, and of course Ashai by the Shadow, literally the definition of a cursed city. Westeros and the wider world is littered with countless seemingly haunted or abandoned places where people fear to go. And while we can't say for sure if there are what we would call ghosts in the traditional sense in Westeros, there are definitely some kind of otherworldly elements to these places. So in this video, we're going to take a look at a few haunted and spooky places across the continent of Westeros. Snowflakes swirled from a dark sky and ashes rose to meet them, the grey and the white whirling around each other as flaming arrows arched above a wooden wall and dead things shambled, silent through the cold, beneath a great grey cliff where fires burned inside 100 caves. Then the wind rose and the white mist came sweeping in, impossibly cold, and one by one the fires went out. Afterwards only the skulls remained. The Thoughts of Melisandre on Hardhome, A Dance with Dragons Chapter 31, Melisandre 1. There is no particular order to this list, but I do want to start with a few places beyond the wall because of the frontier and unknown edge of the map feeling you get with the lands beyond the wall really add to the unnatural and spooky elements of it. In fact, there are some chapters in A Storm of Swords, especially the attack on the Fist of the First Men and Samwell and Gilly's travels through the haunted forest back to Castle Black while pursued by the undead, that can sometimes come across as straight up horror. It was these chapters and seeing how Sam grew in them that really sold me on his status as a point of view character. There are a few places beyond the wall I think are worth talking about. Hardhome, in particular, it's an abandoned free folk settlement that lies beyond the wall. It's on the tip of the peninsula Storod's Point on the Shivering Sea, located beneath a great cliff pocketed with cave mouths. It sits on a sheltered bay and has a natural deep harbour, large enough for ships, meaning at some point it was likely a busy trading hub. In fact, there are several indications it was. Wood and stone are plentiful, the waters teem with fish, and there are colonies of seals and sea cows close at hand. A great giant cliff looms above the settlement. Nowadays, there is no shelter there for people except from the caves, dubbed the Screaming Caves by the men of the Night's Watch, given the sound they make on a windy night. The Screaming Caves alone are enough to make Hardhome a very spooky place, but its history and the mystery behind it even more so. Hardhome at one point was close to becoming the only true permanent town north of the wall, given its size and population. The fact it grew as big as it did given the customs and roaming nature of the free folk is an impressive feat. Before its destruction, a maester known as Wylis journeyed to Hardhome aboard a Pentoshi trader and established himself as a healer and counsellor under the protection of Gorm the Wolf, one of the 4 chieftains who controlled Hardhome, so that he might write of the local customs of the free folk. However, Gorm was murdered, and Wylis, in mortal danger, fled back to the safety of Old Town, where he then wrote a book about his time at Hardhome. The settlement was very abruptly destroyed about 600 years ago. All we really know is something terrible happened one night, but the details are unclear. The The homes of those who inhabited Hardhome are said to have been burned with flames so high and so hot that the Night's Watch on the wall thought the sun was rising in the north. Afterwards, ashes rained down on the haunted forest and shivering sea alike for almost 6 months. While we cannot say exactly what happened, there are some rumours that Hardhome's people were carried off into slavery by slavers from across the narrow sea, or slaughtered for meat by cannibals out of Skagos. But in truth there is little proof for either of these tales, and that it in fact could be something much more otherworldly. Traders investigating Hardhome reported a landscape of charred trees and burned bones, water choked with swollen corpses, and shrieks and echoes coming from the cave mouths. A ship later sent by the Night's Watch around the same time also reported the strange screams coming from the caves. While we do not know what horrors happened at Hardhome, we do know that the free folk never settled the site again. It became overgrown by wilderness. Rangers of the Night's Watch roaming north of the wall told tales of Hardhome being haunted by ghouls, demons, and burning ghosts, with an unhealthy taste for blood. Hardhome does play a role in A Dance with Dragons, with Jon Snow as Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, sending ships to pick up stranded wildlings under the leadership of Mother Mole, who would journey to Hardhome after the wildling defeat at the Wall. When Cotter Pike, who's in command of the expedition, reaches Hardhome, they report the wildlings are eating their own dead, and there are presumably hundreds of wights in the forest and in the sea itself. Slavers have already taken some of the wildlings to Braavos. Cotter sends a raven to plead for help via land from Jon, since travelling by sea is far too dangerous. And currently, unless we see a Winds for Winter, that's all we really know about Hardhome. Maybe perhaps some Hardhome-like event from the TV show might occur. No one would admit to being afraid. They were men in the Night's Watch after all, but Jon could feel the unease. 4 empty villages, no wildlings anywhere, even the game seemingly fled. The haunted forest had never seemed more haunted. The thoughts of Jon Snow on the haunted forest. A Clash of Kings chapter 13, Jon 2. I think the haunted forest itself is also a really spooky location. Well, haunted is in the name, but it is the perfect location for an untamed wilderness beyond the edge of the map infested with undead. We see this very clearly in the fantastic prologue of A Game of Thrones, where we first see the White Walkers, and it really takes centre stage during Samwell's A Storm of Sword chapters, while Sam and Gilly are pursued by the undead as they try to reach the wall. The haunted forest is an immense woodland stretching for leagues beyond the wall. It lies outside the domain of the Seven Kingdoms and is the home to the Free Folk. Frostfang's mountains mark the western boundary, while the Shivering Sea and the Bay of Seals border it to the east. To the north it gives way to the enchanted lands of Always Winter. Traditionally, the Night's Watch will have cut all the trees within half a mile of the wall for visibility and firewood. But over the millennia, and as the number of brothers diminished, the tree line in some places has crept closer to the wall, aside from the inhabited forts of Castle Black, the Shadow Tower, and Eastwatch by the Sea, where the forest is still maintained. From atop the wall, the haunted forest appears as a vast green expanse when not covered in snow, and is the only known location where one can find more than 2 or 3 weirwoods in a single place, as most south of the wall, apart from a few select locations, were cut down by the First Men and then the Andals. The haunted forest contains numerous free folk villages and settlements, such as White Tree and Craster's Keep, with the Fist of the First Men, a great hill isolated near the Milkwater River in the western part of the forest, which contains an abandoned ring fort of the First Men. It seemed so huge. The men seemed dwarfed by it, like mice in a ruined hall, and there is darkness there, a taste in the air. I was so glad to leave that place. Queen Alysanne to Jaehaerys the Conciliator. On the Nightfort, Fire and Blood, Jaehaerys and Alysanne, their triumphs and tragedies. The Nightfort is by far one of the creepiest places in Westeros, not just because of its current abandoned state, but because of its ancient and very dark history. It was the largest castle on the wall, and the oldest, being at least twice as old as Castle Black. The Nightfort is remembered in children's bedtime stories of the North, dating back thousands of years. It was claimed that it was at the Nightfort the Night King, reigned before his name was wiped from recorded history and the memories of men, and where the Rat Cook served an Andal king, believed to be either Tywell II Lannister or Oswell Arryn, his son baked into a pie. The Nightfort is also where an apprentice boy faced the things that came into the night, where blind Sermon Stareye saw hellhounds fight, and where Maddox walked the yards and climbed the towers to butcher his brothers in the dark. Some of these stories are described in Archmaester Harmon's Watchers on the Wall, but in truth we know very little about their contents, other than a vague idea of what they are about. With the dwindling of the Night's Watch, the Nightfort had become 3/4 empty and too costly to maintain. A Benton Glover once escorted Queen Alysanne Targaryen from Castle Black to the Nightfort during the Queen's visit to the Wall in 56 AC. She would later convince Lord Commander Lothar Burleigh that the Nightfort, which she found unpleasant, should be abandoned for a new, smaller castle that was easier to maintain. The new castle, Deep Lake, 7 miles to the east, was paid for by the Queen's jewels. The Nightfort was abandoned during the construction of Deep Lake, and its brothers were reassigned there. According to maesters who served at the Nightfort, the castle was rebuilt many times over thousands of years, with only the deep stone vaults remaining from its first incarnation. The abandoned Nightfort has broken towers and a maze of tunnels connecting its vaults. Buildings include a bow tower, a rookery, a brewhouse, an emptied library, a dungeon capable of holding 500 prisoners, a bathhouse, an armory, a forge, all now in ruins. A rat-filled Great Hall only has one wall remaining. The yard has become a small forest, and a twisted weirwood grows through a hole in the kitchen. There are also trees growing in the stables. The Nightfort's kitchen, a stone octagon with a broken dome, contains a huge central well that descends into the earth. A skinny weirwood has grown through the kitchen slate floors. The well has stone steps which circle down into the depths, to the black gate at the bottom, which is said to only be findable and accessible by members of the Night's Watch. Set deep into the wall of the well, the black gate is made of a faintly glowing white weirwood tree, very different from any other we've seen in the story. The old face carved into the wood is pale, shrunken and wrinkled with blind white eyes. When someone approaches the black gate, the blind eyes open and the face asks them to identify themselves. If a man at the Night's Watch repeats part of his vow, the black gate will open, allowing admittance. The door's lips open wider and wider until nothing remains but a great gaping mouth in a ring of wrinkles. The Black Gate is as old as the wall itself, and there are popular fan theories that suggest it was once used as a form of human sacrifice, with babes left at the gate as an offering to the others, similar to how Craster uses his sons beyond the wall. Both Samwell and Bran POV chapters at the Nightfort in the Storm of Swords truly get across how scary this place is supposed to be, with the tale of the Rat Cook and other ill events adding to the uncomfortable aura, which is only made worse by the discovery of the creepy Black Gate and the frankly disturbing weirwood within. It was a dark place, primal place, 3 acres of old forest untouched for 10,000 years. As a gloomy castle rose around it, it smelled of moist earth and decay. The thoughts of Catelyn Stark on Winterfell's Godswood, a Game of Thrones Chapter 2, Catelyn 1. There are 2 parts of Winterfell I think come across as very creepy, depending on how you read it. The Godswood at Winterfell is huge, and is like a pocket of ancient Westeros within the walls of Winterfell itself. But what I find interesting is depending on your point of view as a character, changes how you might view somewhere like the Winterfell's Godswood. For example, someone like Ned Stark might find it peaceful, a place of contemplation, but as we see in Catelyn Stark's first point of view chapter in A Game of Thrones, she tends to find the Godswood unnerving, as if she's not welcome there. Given her Riverlands and thus Andal background, growing up worshipping the faith of the Seven, we see how those south of the Neck view the worship of the old gods as something much darker than that of the faith of the Seven. Part of what adds to this unnerving atmosphere, as Catelyn puts it, is how primordial the Godswood is. The multitude of trees create this thick and dense canopy, making the woods dark, Packed earth and moss make the ground very uneven. At the centre of the grove stands this ancient weirwood with a melancholy face carved into it, standing over this cold pool of black water. Across the Godswood from the heart tree, beneath the windows of the guest house, is of course underground hot springs that feed 3 small pools, with moss-covered walls looming above them. It very much feels like you're stepping back in time, how quiet and peaceful it is. Winterfell also has its crypts, which also seem like a good choice when talking about spooky and haunted places in Westeros. While many of the ancient seats of power in Westeros might have similar crypts, none seem to likely be as ancient as that of House Stark. The crypt's ironwood door, located in Winterfell's oldest section near the first keep, inside a narrow spiraled staircase descends deep into the dark, chilly depths, branching out into multiple levels, with the lowest and deepest tombs said to be the oldest. Every member of the Stark family can be buried in the crypt, but statues are normally traditionally reserved for the kings in the north and the lords of Winterfell, with their likenesses carved into stone, each accompanied by a giant stone direwolf at their feet. It's also tradition that an iron longsword is laid across every lord's lap to keep restless spirits bound within the crypts. The vault itself is vast, said to stretch larger than Winterfell itself above, and given the sheer size of Winterfell, makes the crypts unimaginably huge, with the older generations buried in the deeper, darker levels. The lowest floors are rumoured to have partly collapsed, making them inaccessible, and we have no idea what could potentially be down there. The most recent tombs belong to Lord Rickard Stark and his children, Brandon and Lyanna, who died as a result of Robert's rebellion. Empty, unsealed tombs further back await future generations of House Stark. Lord Eddard broke tradition after Robert's rebellion by commissioning statues for both of his siblings, Brandon and Lyanna, even though they were not lords. Their effigies stand on either side of his father's tomb. Eddard brings flowers to the tomb of his late sister Lyanna when he can. When Arya Stark was a little girl, when she saw the crypts for the first time, old Nan had told her it contained spiders and rats the size of dogs. On that occasion, Jon Snow, having covered himself with flour, tried to scare Arya and his younger siblings, pretending to be a ghost. Bran Stark also said he played in the vaults with Jon and Robb and his sisters, with Arya sometimes hiding in the crypts, playing Come Inside My Castle and Monsters and Maidens, among the Stone Kings. There are several dreams and visions within the main books that add to the crypt's spooky feeling, and the idea there might be more to them than meets the eye. In the Game of Thrones Jon 4, at Castle Black, Jon Snow tells Samwell that he sometimes dreams of the crypts. He's afraid of what he will find within them and awakens when they become too dark. Later in Eddard 13, one in King's Landing, Ned dreams of the crypts beneath Winterfell, envisioning the Kings of Winter watching him, with eyes of ice and stone direwolves snarling at him, Lyanna's statue whispering to him, "Promise me, Ned." Bran also has countless visions of the three-eyed raven leading him down into the crypt throughout the book. Later in A Storm of Swords, Jon 8, Jon wishes he could show the tombs of the kings to Ygritte, but he later dreams he's walking past the Stone Kings, who tell him there is no place for him in the crypt. Gods, but I hate this bloody castle. Harrenhal had witnessed more horror in its 300 years than Casterly Rock had witnessed in 3000. The Thoughts of Jaime Lannister on Harrenhal. A Feast for Crows, Chapter 27. Jaime 3. Harrenhal is arguably the most cursed castle in Westeros, if, well, you believe in curses. But when you learn about its history, there is no surprise why many have this view. Harrenhal is, of course, the monstrous castle, built by Harren the Black, king of the Isles and Rivers, prior to Aegon's conquest. He pillaged the wealth and resources of the Riverlands and effectively used the small folk as his labour force, very much under duress, with countless dying in the castle's construction. So even before Harren's downfall, the castle had a feared and dark reputation. When Harrenhal completed his vast fortress, he proudly had declared it impregnable, yet he had not foreseen Aegon the Conqueror and his dragons. On the very day Harren took up residence, Aegon landed at the site that would one day become King's Landing. Mounting his dragon, Balerion the Blackdread, Aegon soared above Harrenhal's towering walls and rained fire and blood upon it. Harren was roasted alive in the tallest tower, now called the Kingspire Tower, and his entire line perished in the flames. The intense heat of the dragonfire left the castle towers charred and half melted, a scar it bears to this day. Since Aegon's conquest, Harrenhal has proven a ruinous prize, Its sheer size makes it impossible to garrison properly and ruinously expensive to maintain. Legends claim that Harren mixed human blood into the mortar of the stoneworks. How much of this is true we cannot say, but it only made the many whispers of the castle being cursed more widespread. The sudden deaths and misfortune of nearly every house that has ruled Harrenhal since Harren's downfall are seen as proof, feeding the belief that no lord can ever hold it for long. First after Harren was House Cohores, with Aegon the Conqueror granting Harrenhal to his master-at-arms Quentyn Cohores. House Cohores died out during the reign of King Aenys Targaryen, when Lord Gargan the Guest was slain by Harren the Red's rebellion. Next it was granted to House Harroway, with Lord Lucas Harroway succeeding Gargan as Lord. House Harroway helped to defeat Prince Aegon the Uncrowned in the battle beneath the God's Eye for Maegor Targaryen, but both the Harroways of Harrenhal and Lord Harroway's town were extinguished by King Maegor in 44 AC. It was then that tales of Harrenhal being cursed began. Sir Walden Towers was named the new Lord of Harrenhal after winning a melee announced by Maegor, though he died of his wounds within 2 weeks of the event. His son Jordan Towers would receive Harrenhal, though not all the lands formerly belonging to House Harroway, as Lord Harroway's town was granted to Lord Alton Butterwell, and the rest of the Harroway holdings to Lord Darnall Darry. House Towers became extinct when Lord Maegor Towers died without heirs in 61 AC. Since the sickly and impoverished Lord Maegor only utilised one of Harren's 5 towers, the Tower of Dread, the then King Jaehaerys Targaryen settled his widow's sister, Queen Rhaena, in Harrenhal. Rhaena would live in the Widow's Tower, and became friends with the ill Maegor, and she took care of his household after their lord's passing. After Rhaena in turn died in 73 AC, the king had her remains burned and interned at the castle. After the death of Princess Rhaena, King Jaehaerys granted Harrenhal to Sir Bywin Strong. A century later, in 101 AC, House Strong hosted the Great Council at Harrenhal, where Prince Viserys was chosen as the old king's successor. By 120 AC, tragedy struck when Lord Lionel Strong and his heir Sir Harwin perished in a fire at Harrenhal under suspicious circumstances. Many blamed it on the notorious curse of the castle, though others suspected foul play. Possible culprits include Daemon Targaryen, Corlys Velaryon, and Lionel's younger son, Larys Strong, and even King Viserys himself. During the early stages of the Dance of the Dragons, Sir Simon Strong, who was the Castellan of Harrenhal, surrendered the castle to Prince Daemon Targaryen, who had used the fortress as a stronghold for the Blacks to launch raids across the surrounding region. When Prince Aemon Targaryen and Criston Cole led a host of Greens to reclaim the castle, they found it abandoned. In reprisal, Aemon executed Sir Simon and all of his kin. During the regency of King Aegon III, Alice Rivers, whom some believe was a bastard of House Strong and rumoured healer or witch depending on who you ask, came to be known as the Witch Queen of Harrenhal. She claimed to Sir Regis Groves and Sir Daemon Darry, who had come to retake the castle from her, that she was in fact the widow of Prince Aemond Targaryen and that her young son was his true-born son and rightful heir to the Iron Throne. The meeting ended in blood. Sir Regis did not survive, while Sir Daemon Darry fled back to Darry. Not long after, a messenger from Darry reported having glimpsed a dragon within the walls of Harrenhal. Alarmed, the regents in King's Landing began preparations to raise a great host to retake Harrenhal. Their plans, however, were derailed by the outbreak of the Winter Fever in 133 AC. We have no idea what happened to Alice and her child, which is quite important given the idea her child could have a rightful claim to the Iron Throne. I suspect we might get more details about this in a second volume of Fire and Blood. King Aegon III Targaryen gave the ruined castle to Sir Lucas Lothston in 151 AC. Manfred Lothston was involved in the Blackfyre Rebellion in 196 AC. Lady Danella helped suppress the Second Blackfyre Rebellion with the Might of Harrenhal in 212 AC. House Lothston was cast down during the reign of King Maekar Targaryen, as Danelle descended into madness. The Wents are the 7th noble house to rule Harrenhal. They were originally knights in the service of the Lothstons. After Lady Danelle fell into madness, the Wents received Harrenhal for their role in defeating the Lothstons. Just like the other houses who held Harrenhal before them, the Wents have been marked by tragedy. Harrenhal, given its nature of being a huge ruined castle, is inherently creepy, and the tales of the fates of the houses who have ruled the castle only adds to this aura. But there does also seem to be some kind of element of connection to the old gods and the green men, whom call the Isle of Faces in the middle of the God's Eye home. But the connection between Harrenhal and the Isle is really deserving of a video of its own. Even into the main book series, the Curse of Harrenhal still seems to be going strong, used as a base by several factions during the War of the Five Kings, with many instances of torture and execution happening there. Several of the men who have been left in charge of Harrenhal have met grim fates, so it seems the curse's reputation will only grow by story's end.